Some betrayals cut so deep they changed the shape of your soul forever. Mine started with a missing necklace and ended with me discovering that the family I'd loved unconditionally had been plotting my destruction from day one. The call came at 2:47 a.m. on a Tuesday in March. Marcus answered with the groggy voice of someone pulled from deep sleep, but I was already awake, staring at the ceiling and worrying about his mother's latest chemotherapy results. The voice on the other end belonged to Rebecca, his older sister, and even through the phone speaker, I could hear the tears. "She's asking for you both," Rebecca sobbed. "The doctors say it's time." Margaret Chen had been fighting ovarian cancer for 18 months, and I'd been right there beside her for every appointment, every treatment, every small victory and devastating setback. While Marcus worked 60-hour weeks at his law firm, and Rebecca lived 4 states away in Denver, I'd become Margaret's primary caregiver, driver, advocate, and friend. She used to joke that I was the daughter she'd never had, which always made Rebecca's face tighten with something I'd mistaken for grief rather than jealousy. We threw on clothes and drove through the empty streets of Milwaukee to the hospice facility where Margaret had been moved the week before. The building felt tomb-like at that hour, all whispered conversations and the soft beeping of machines that measured the distance between life and death. Margaret looked so small in the hospital bed, her once vibrant personality reduced to shallow breathing and the occasional flutter of eyelids. Her hands, which had taught me to make her famous dumplings and braided my hair during our lazy Sunday afternoons, lay motionless on the white sheets. Marcus took one hand while I took the other. Rebecca stood at the foot of the bed, her husband Tyler hovering behind her like a shadow. We'd never been close, Tyler and I. He worked in financial consulting and had always seemed to view people through the lens of their net worth. But grief makes strange allies, and we stood together in that sterile room, watching the woman who'd been the heart of our family slip away. Margaret passed quietly at dawn, with the spring sun streaming through the windows and all of us holding some part of her. Her last words were to Marcus, "Take care of each other. Family is everything." I believed those words completely. I had no idea they would become the cruelest irony of my life. The funeral was beautiful. Exactly what Margaret would have wanted. Simple, elegant, filled with the laughter of shared memories rather than just tears. I spent the day making sure everyone was fed, that the elderly relatives had places to sit, that Marcus didn't have to worry about anything except grieving his mother. It's what I'd always done in his family. I took care of people. It's what made me feel like I belonged. The trouble started 3 days later. I was cleaning out Margaret's apartment, a task that felt both sacred and heartbreaking. Every object told a story. The tea set from her honeymoon in China, the photo albums chronicling Marcus's childhood, a collection of romance novels she'd been too embarrassed to display but too sentimental to discard. I was carefully wrapping her good china when Rebecca burst through the front door, her face flushed with rage. "Where is it?" she demanded, not bothering with pleasantries. "Where's what?" I stood up from the pile of newspaper and bubble wrap, genuinely confused. "Don't play dumb with me, Sophia. I know you took it." The accusation hung in the air like smoke. I felt my stomach drop, though I had no idea what she was talking about. "Rebecca, I honestly don't know what you mean." "The jade necklace," she spat. "Mom's jade necklace that belonged to her grandmother, the one she promised to me when I was 16. It's missing from her jewellery box." I thought of the small wooden jewellery box on Margaret's dresser, the one I'd looked through the day before to catalogue everything for the estate inventory Marcus had requested. "Rebecca, I never saw any jade necklace. Maybe she kept it somewhere else, or maybe—" "Stop lying!" Her voice cracked like a whip. "Tyler saw you in her bedroom yesterday, going through her things, and now the most valuable piece of jewellery she owned is conveniently missing." The blood drained from my face. "You think I stole from your dying mother?" "I think you've been planning this for months, getting close to her, playing the devoted daughter-in-law, making sure you were the one with access to everything. God, you're good. You had us all fooled." I sank into Margaret's favourite armchair, the one where we'd spent countless afternoons watching old movies and sharing stories. The woman who'd treated me like family was gone, and now her daughter was accusing me of being a vulture who'd circled her deathbed waiting for opportunities to steal. "Rebecca, please, you know me. You know I would never—" "Do I? Do I really know you? Sophia? You showed up in Marcus's life right when he was starting to make partner. You wormed your way into Mom's affections. You made yourself indispensable, and now that she's gone, you're cashing in." The front door opened, and Marcus walked in carrying coffee and sandwiches. He took one look at our faces and set everything down on the kitchen counter. "What's going on?" Rebecca turned to her brother with tears streaming down her cheeks. "Marcus, I have to tell you something about your wife. Something I should have told you a long time ago." What followed was the most surreal 20 minutes of my life. Rebecca, with Tyler nodding along like a bobblehead, painted a picture of me that was unrecognisable. According to her, I'd been manipulating Marcus from the moment we met, using my position as a pediatric nurse to appear caring and trustworthy while actually being a calculating gold digger. She targeted you, Rebecca said to Marcus, her voice heavy with manufactured concern. Think about it. You met her at that charity gala for the Children's Hospital. She made sure to be there in her nurse's uniform, looking all noble and caring. But she researched you first. She knew you were about to make partner. She knew about Mom's money. Marcus looked at me with confusion, waiting for me to defend myself, but I was too stunned to speak. The charity gala where we'd met had been my idea. My hospital had been trying to raise funds for a new pediatric wing, and I'd volunteered to work the event. I'd had no idea who Marcus was beyond a handsome man who'd made me laugh while I served him appetizers. And the way she isolated Mom from us, Tyler added, speaking for the first time. Think about how often Sophia was the only one at doctor's appointments, how she convinced your mother to change her will. I started, but Rebecca cut me off. She did, Marcus. Mom told me she was updating her will to include Sophia, said she wanted to make sure her third daughter was taken care of. That's when I knew what this was really about. The room tilted sideways. Margaret had mentioned updating her will, but only to ensure her wishes about organ donation and funeral arrangements were clear. She'd never said anything about including me financially, and I'd certainly never suggested such a thing. And now, Rebecca continued, her voice building to a crescendo, she's stolen the one thing that meant the most to me, the jade necklace that was supposed to be mine. It's worth over $15,000, Marcus. She couldn't even wait until we'd finished grieving to start looting. I watched my husband's face change as his sister spoke. Doubt crept in around the edges of his eyes, followed by something that looked suspiciously like disgust. The man who'd held me while I cried over his mother's diagnosis, who'd thanked me countless times for caring for Margaret when he couldn't be there, was looking at me like I was a stranger. Marcus, I said quietly, none of this is true. You know me. You know who I am. But doubt, once planted, grows like a weed. Where is the necklace, Sophia? He asked, his voice carefully neutral. I don't know. I never saw it. Rebecca, can you describe it? Maybe we can figure out where your mother might have put it. Oh, you're good, Tyler said with a laugh that held no humour, playing innocent right to the end. Rebecca pulled out her phone and showed me a photo, herself and Margaret at Christmas 2 years ago, Margaret wearing an intricate jade necklace with gold filigree work. It was gorgeous, obviously valuable, and completely unfamiliar to me. I've never seen this necklace, I said, studying the photo. Margaret never wore it when I was with her, never mentioned it. Are you sure she still had it? She was wearing it in the hospital 2 weeks ago, Rebecca said triumphantly. I took a picture. She swiped to another photo, Margaret in her hospital bed, the jade necklace visible above her gown. Tyler saw it too. I stared at the photo, trying to remember. 2 weeks ago, I'd been at the hospital every day, but I'd never noticed the necklace. Had Margaret been wearing it under her hospital gowns? Had I simply missed it? Sophia, Marcus said slowly, I need you to think carefully. Are you absolutely certain you've never seen this necklace? The doubt in his voice broke something inside me. Marcus, I swear to you, I've never seen that necklace. I would never steal from your mother. I loved her. Loved her enough to rob her blind, Rebecca muttered. That's when Marcus made the decision that would destroy our marriage. Instead of defending me, instead of standing by the woman he'd promised to love and cherish, he chose his family's narrative over his wife's truth. I think you should go home, he said quietly. Let Rebecca and me finish here. Marcus, please, Sophia, just go. I drove home in a daze, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. In the span of an hour, I'd gone from grieving daughter-in-law to suspected thief. The family I'd served and loved for 3 years had turned on me with a speed that left me breathless. But that was only the beginning. Marcus came home that evening, carrying a box of Margaret's papers and wearing an expression I'd never seen before. Cold, analytical, prosecutorial. He'd shifted into lawyer mode, and I was apparently his client's opposing counsel. We need to talk, he said, setting the box on our dining room table. I'd spent the afternoon crying and trying to make sense of what had happened, but I'd also done something else. I'd called the hospice facility and asked about Margaret's personal effects. The nurse I spoke with confirmed that all jewellery had been removed and inventoried when Margaret was admitted. There had been no jade necklace on the list. Marcus, I called the hospice. They have records of everything Margaret was wearing when she was admitted. There's no mention of any jade necklace. He pulled out a folder and opened it without looking at me. Rebecca found some interesting things in Mom's papers. Receipts, bank statements, some concerning patterns. My stomach dropped. What kind of patterns? Cash withdrawals. Always on days when you took her to appointments. Small amounts, but frequent. 200 here, 300 there. It adds up to over $5,000 in the past 6 months. I thought about those cash withdrawals, remembering. Marcus, your mother asked me to stop at the bank sometimes after appointments. She said she liked to have cash for tips, for the housekeeping service, for charity donations. I never touched that money. Can you prove that? The question hit me like a slap. Can I prove I didn't steal from your dying mother? Marcus, listen to yourself. This is me you're talking to, your wife. My wife who spent an awful lot of time alone with my mother. My wife who suddenly has a lot of new jewellery and clothes. I looked down at my outfit, a sweater I'd bought at Target and jeans that were 2 years old. What new jewellery? What clothes? Marcus, I haven't bought anything significant in months except groceries and gas. He pulled out another paper. What about this charge at Nordstrom, $800, 3 weeks ago? I grabbed the statement and studied it. The charge was there on our joint credit card, but I'd never made it. I didn't buy anything at Nordstrom. I've never spent $800 at Nordstrom in my life. So someone else used our credit card. Marcus, someone could have cloned it. Or... I stopped, a horrible thought occurring to me. Who else has access to our accounts? What do you mean? I mean, who else knows our account numbers, our PINs, our security questions? Who else has been in our house, seen our mail, our financial information? His expression shifted slightly, uncertainty creeping in. Sophia, what are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that someone is setting me up, and I think we both know who has motive to destroy our marriage. The deeper conspiracy. The truth began unravelling slowly, like pulling a thread that eventually unravels an entire sweater. It started when I insisted Marcus call Nordstrom to investigate the mysterious charge. The customer service representative was helpful and thorough, checking their records while we waited on speakerphone. I see the transaction you're referring to, she said. It was made in our Denver location for a jade jewellery set. The customer paid with your card and presented identification. Marcus and I looked at each other. Denver, where Rebecca lived. Can you tell us anything else about the transaction? Marcus asked. Well, I can see that the customer provided a driver's license for ID verification. The name on the license was Rebecca Chen. The silence in our living room was deafening. Rebecca had used our credit card, with Marcus's last name on her fake ID, to purchase jade jewellery 3 weeks ago. Right around the time she claimed to have seen Margaret wearing the missing necklace. There's more, the representative continued. The customer specifically requested that we photograph the items for insurance purposes. I have those photos in the system if you'd like me to email them. The photos arrived 10 minutes later. There it was, the exact jade necklace Rebecca claimed I'd stolen from Margaret, along with matching earrings and a bracelet. All purchased with our money, 3 weeks before Margaret's death, in a city where I'd never been. Marcus stared at the photos on his laptop screen, his face cycling through confusion, realization, and finally, a cold fury I'd never seen before. She bought the necklace herself, then she put it on Mom for those hospital photos to make it look like Mom owned it. And then she took it back and claimed, I stole it, I finished. Marcus, this was planned. This whole thing was orchestrated to destroy our marriage. He was already reaching for his phone. I'm calling her right now. No, I said, placing my hand over his. Don't. Not yet. If Rebecca went this far, if she planned this carefully, there's more. We need to understand the full scope before we confront her. It took us 3 days to uncover the complete picture, and it was worse than either of us had imagined. Rebecca hadn't just set me up for theft. She'd been systematically poisoning Marcus's perception of me for months, planting seeds of doubt that would blossom into full-scale suspicion when the right catalyst appeared. The fake Nordstrom charge was just the beginning. Using her knowledge of our financial accounts, gained during family dinners when we discussed our budget and goals, Rebecca had managed to make several other fraudulent purchases that painted a picture of secret spending and financial deception. She'd used online retailers with similar names to legitimate businesses where I actually shopped, counting on Marcus to not look too closely at the details. But the most damaging evidence came from Margaret's own papers. Rebecca had been visiting her mother more frequently than any of us realised, using those visits to plant documents and forge others. The bank withdrawal records were real, but the pattern Rebecca had highlighted ignored the corresponding deposits. Margaret had been pulling cash for legitimate expenses and then redepositing the unused portions. More disturbing were the handwritten notes Rebecca had planted among Margaret's papers, apparently written by Margaret but actually forged by Rebecca. Notes that expressed concern about my motives, worry that I was too interested in family finances, and doubts about whether Marcus was truly happy in our marriage. She was building a case, Marcus said, sitting in our kitchen surrounded by papers and evidence, creating a narrative that would explode when the right trigger presented itself. Mom's death was just the catalyst. But why? I asked, though I was beginning to suspect the answer. Marcus ran his hands through his hair, looking older than his 34 years. The will. Mom did change her will, just not the way Rebecca said. She didn't include you for money. She included you as executor alongside me. Rebecca was supposed to be the sole executor originally, which would have given her control over the entire estate distribution. How much money are we talking about? 2.4 million, between the house, the investments, and the life insurance policies. Rebecca stood to inherit about 40% as the oldest child, but as executor, she would have had authority over how and when everything was distributed. With you as co-executor, that control was shared. The scope of Rebecca's deception was breathtaking. She'd been willing to destroy her brother's marriage, frame an innocent woman for theft, and manipulate a grieving family's emotions, all to maintain financial control over their mother's estate. There's something else, Marcus said quietly. I called the hospice again, asked more detailed questions about Mom's final days. Rebecca was there alone with Mom for several hours the day before she died. The staff remember because she asked them to leave the room for private family time. That would have been when she put the necklace on Mom for those photos. She used your dying mother as a prop in her scheme, I said, feeling sick. And she would have gotten away with it if she'd been satisfied with just removing you as executor. But she got greedy. The theft accusation was supposed to be the final nail in the coffin, the thing that would make me divorce you immediately and never question her version of events. The confrontation. We decided to confront Rebecca and Tyler together, on neutral ground. Marcus arranged a meeting at a restaurant under the pretense of discussing final estate matters. I insisted on recording the conversation, with Marcus's phone discreetly capturing audio that might be needed for legal proceedings. Rebecca arrived looking appropriately grief-stricken, dressed in black and carrying tissues she didn't need but used for effect. Tyler followed behind her, checking his phone and radiating the same financial anxiety that had characterized his behavior since Margaret's diagnosis. I'm so glad we're finally handling this properly, Rebecca said, settling into the booth across from us. I know this has been hard on everyone, but we need to think about what Mom would have wanted. Actually, Marcus said, that's exactly what we're here to discuss. What Mom really wanted. He placed the printed emails from Nordstrom on the table between us, along with copies of the fraudulent purchases and the forged documents we'd discovered. Rebecca's face went through a remarkable transformation. Surprise, calculation, defiance, and finally, resignation. I can explain, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. Please do, I said calmly. Explain how you used our credit card to buy the jade necklace you claimed I stole. Explain the forged notes you planted among your mother's papers. Explain why you were willing to destroy your brother's marriage for money. Tyler was staring at his wife with an expression of dawning horror. Rebecca, what did you do? I protected our family, she said, her voice gaining strength as she shifted into justification mode. Marcus, you don't understand what she was doing to Mom. How she was manipulating her, isolating her from us. I had to document it, had to make you see. By forging evidence? Marcus's voice was deadly quiet. By committing credit card fraud? By lying about theft? She was going to take everything. Rebecca's composure finally cracked. Mom was talking about changing the will again, maybe leaving more to Sophia since she'd been so helpful. I couldn't let some outsider destroy what our family had built. I never asked for anything from your mother, I said. I never even knew about her will until after she died. You didn't have to ask. You just had to be there, being perfect, being the daughter she never had. Do you know what it's like to watch your mother love someone else's child more than you? The raw pain in Rebecca's voice almost made me feel sorry for her. Almost. But not enough to forgive the calculated cruelty of her actions. So you decided to frame me for theft, I said. You bought jewellery with our money, photographed it on your dying mother, and then accused me of stealing it. You were willing to send me to prison. I was willing to do whatever it took to protect my family's inheritance. Tyler stood up abruptly, throwing his napkin on the table. Our family's inheritance? Rebecca, we're comfortable. We don't need your mother's money. What you did is insane. Don't you dare judge me, Rebecca snapped at her husband. You've been complaining about money for months. The kids, the college funds, the house payments, your parents' medical bills. I was solving all of that. By destroying innocent people, Marcus said. By manipulating our dying mother. By lying to everyone who trusted you. Rebecca's expression hardened. Fine, you want the truth? I've been planning this since the day Marcus announced he was marrying her. Some random nurse who appeared out of nowhere right when he was getting successful? Please. I knew what she was, even if he was too blind to see it. What am I, Rebecca? I asked quietly. A gold digger? A manipulator? Someone who targets successful men and worms her way into their families for financial gain? I've seen it before. I wasn't going to let it happen to my brother. The irony was staggering. Rebecca, who had actually committed fraud and theft, was accusing me of the exact crimes she'd perpetrated. The projection was so complete, it would have been fascinating if it weren't devastating. Show her the recordings, Marcus said to me. I pulled out my phone and played back several voicemails Rebecca had left for Margaret during her final weeks. We'd found them on Margaret's old answering machine, messages Rebecca had assumed would be erased after her mother's death. In them, Rebecca could be heard coaching Margaret to be careful around me, to watch her bank accounts, and to think about whether Marcus really seems happy. "You spent months poisoning your own mother against me," I said as the recordings played. "You made her final weeks filled with suspicion and doubt instead of peace and love." "I made her aware," Rebecca said, but her voice was weaker now, defensive rather than accusatory. "You made her miserable," Marcus said. "The nursing staff told me she kept asking them if they thought I looked tired, if they thought my marriage was in trouble. She died worried that I was unhappy because of lies you fed her." That's when Tyler made the decision that completed Rebecca's isolation. "I'm done," he said. "Rebecca, I'm taking the kids and staying at my brother's house. Don't contact me until you've gotten serious help." He walked out of the restaurant without looking back, leaving Rebecca sitting across from us with tears streaming down her face. But even then, even as her world collapsed around her, she couldn't admit the full scope of her wrongdoing. "You don't understand," she whispered. "I was protecting our family. I was protecting Marcus from making a terrible mistake." "The only terrible mistake I made," Marcus said, "was believing you over my wife." The legal consequences came swiftly once Marcus turned over our evidence to the authorities. Credit card fraud, forgery, filing a false police report. Rebecca had actually contacted the police about the stolen necklace before confronting us, and elder abuse for manipulating Margaret during her final illness. The charges were serious enough that Rebecca's attorney immediately began pushing for a plea deal. But the personal consequences were more complex. Marcus filed for divorce from guilt rather than love, convinced that our marriage was too damaged by his betrayal to be repaired. He'd chosen his sister's lies over his wife's truth, and that choice had created a chasm neither of us knew how to bridge. "I failed you in the worst possible way," he told me the night after confronting Rebecca. "I believed the worst about the person I love most in the world. I don't know how to live with that." "We learn to live with it together," I said, "or we don't live with it at all." He chose not to live with it at all. The divorce papers were filed 2 weeks later, accompanied by a settlement so generous it actually made me suspicious. Marcus was giving me everything: the house, most of the savings, even his mother's jewellery collection, including pieces Rebecca had never seen or coveted. "I don't want anything that came from this family," he explained when I questioned the settlement terms. "I want you to have security, to be able to rebuild somewhere else with people who won't fail you the way I did." The day our divorce was finalised, I received an unexpected visitor. Tyler stood at my front door looking exhausted and years older than when I'd last seen him at the restaurant confrontation. "I need to apologise," he said when I let him in, "and I need to tell you something about Rebecca that might help you understand, even if it doesn't excuse what she did." Tyler explained that Rebecca had been in therapy for years, struggling with an anxiety disorder that manifested as obsessive need for control. Her behaviour toward me hadn't been entirely calculated malice. It had been mental illness expressing itself through elaborate schemes to eliminate perceived threats to her sense of security. She convinced herself that you were dangerous," Tyler said. In her mind, she wasn't destroying an innocent person. She was protecting her family from someone who was going to hurt them. The disorder made her paranoid, but it also made her incredibly good at creating evidence for her paranoid beliefs. "Is she getting help now?" "She's in a residential facility, intensive therapy, medication management, the works. The kids and I visit twice a week. She's starting to understand what she did, how sick her thinking had become. She wants to make amends, but she also knows that's not really possible." I thought about Margaret, who had died worried about her son's happiness because of lies her own daughter had fed her. About Marcus, who was so consumed with guilt he couldn't rebuild his life. About Rebecca herself, trapped in a mental illness that had driven her to destroy the family she'd been trying to protect. "Tyler?" I said carefully, "I hope she gets better. I really do. But I also hope you understand that her mental illness doesn't undo the damage she caused. People's lives were destroyed." "I know," he said. "I just wanted you to know that it wasn't really about you. You were a symbol of everything she couldn't control, but you personally didn't do anything to deserve what happened." "I never thought I had," I replied. After Tyler left, I sat in my living room, Margaret's living room. Really, since Marcus had insisted I take the house they'd grown up in, and thought about forgiveness. Not the kind of forgiveness that excuses or forgets, but the kind that refuses to let other people's damage continue poisoning your life. I couldn't forgive Rebecca, but I could stop letting her actions control my future. I couldn't repair my marriage with Marcus, but I could build a new life that wasn't defined by their family's dysfunction. The new beginning. 6 months after the divorce was finalised, I made a decision that surprised everyone, including myself. I kept the house, Margaret's house, with its memories of Sunday dinners and holiday celebrations, its garden where she'd taught me to grow tomatoes, its kitchen where we'd spent countless hours cooking and talking. Everyone expected me to sell it, to move away from Milwaukee and start fresh somewhere else. But this house had been the site of genuine love and acceptance, even if it had also been the site of devastating betrayal. Margaret's love for me had been real, even if her daughter's hatred had been stronger. I turned the house into a bed and breakfast, specializing in providing temporary housing for families dealing with medical crises. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was using the house where I'd been accused of exploitation to actually help vulnerable people navigate their own difficult times. The business grew slowly but steadily. Families dealing with cancer treatments, elderly parents in nursing homes, children with special needs requiring specialist care, they all needed somewhere affordable and nurturing to stay while their lives were in turmoil. I understood that kind of turmoil intimately. Marcus heard about the bed and breakfast through mutual friends and called me one evening about 8 months after our divorce was final. "I heard about what you're doing with the house," he said. His voice sounded different over the phone, lighter somehow. "It seemed like the right use for it," I replied. "Your mother would have approved." "She would have loved it." "Sophia, I need to tell you something. I've been in therapy since Rebecca's arrest, working through the guilt and the family dynamics that made me such a terrible husband to you." "Marcus, please let me finish. I know I don't deserve forgiveness and I'm not asking for it, but I am asking if we could maybe be friends someday. When you're ready, if you're ever ready." I thought about it for a long moment. "I think your mother would have wanted us to be friends," I said finally. "But it's going to take time." "I have time," he said. "I have nothing but time." The Justice Rebecca's sentencing hearing was held on a grey Tuesday in November, almost exactly 1 year after Margaret's death. I attended, not out of vindictiveness, but because I wanted to hear her words, to understand if she truly comprehended the scope of her actions. She looked smaller than I remembered, fragile in her orange jumpsuit and shackles. Her attorney had negotiated a plea deal, 3 years in prison, 5 years probation, full restitution for the financial fraud, and mandatory mental health treatment. It was a relatively light sentence considering the charges, but Tyler had lobbied for leniency on behalf of their children. When given the opportunity to address the court, Rebecca stood and spoke directly to me. "I destroyed your life because I was terrified of losing control of mine," she said, her voice steady but quiet. "I convinced myself that you were a threat to my family, but the real threat was my own illness, my own inability to accept that love isn't a limited resource that gets used up when it's shared." She paused, wiping tears with the back of her shackled hands. "I made my mother's final weeks about suspicion instead of love. I made my brother choose between his family and his wife. I tried to send an innocent woman to prison for crimes I committed. There's no excuse for any of that, mental illness or otherwise. I'm sorry, but I know sorry isn't enough." The judge sentenced her to the full 3 years, noting that while mental illness might explain her actions, it couldn't excuse the calculated nature of her crimes or the devastating impact on multiple families. As Rebecca was led away, she looked back at me one more time. Not with hatred or resentment, but with something that looked like relief. As if the burden of her secrets had finally been lifted, even if the consequences were severe. Tyler approached me outside the courthouse. "Thank you for coming," he said. "I know it couldn't have been easy. How are the kids handling all this?" "They're resilient. They understand that their mom was sick and did things that were wrong, but that she's working to get better. We're all in family therapy now, trying to rebuild trust and communication." "And you?" Tyler looked older than his 40 years, but also somehow more solid, more grounded. "I'm learning to see the warning signs I missed before. Rebecca's need to control every narrative to position herself as the victim or the hero in every situation. I enabled it because it was easier than confronting it." "A lot of people enabled it," I said, "including me in some ways. I never pushed back against her subtle undermining because I wanted to keep peace in the family." "That's not enabling. That's trying to be kind to someone who was manipulating your kindness." As we stood outside the courthouse, I realized that Tyler and I had both been victims of Rebecca's manipulation, just in different ways. He'd been living with someone whose mental illness had convinced her that elaborate deceptions were necessary for survival. I'd been targeted by those deceptions without understanding the psychological machinery behind them. "Tyler," I said, "I hope your family heals. I really do, and I hope Rebecca gets the help she needs to never hurt anyone like this again." "I hope you heal too," he replied. "You deserved better from all of us." The reflection. 2 years later, I was featured in a local magazine article about innovative small businesses that serve community needs. The reporter was particularly interested in how I turned personal trauma into a mission to help others, but I tried to steer the conversation away from the sensational aspects of my story. It's not really about revenge or redemption, I explained to the journalist. It's about refusing to let other people's damage define your future. Bad things happen to me, but they don't get to be the most important things about me. The bed and breakfast was thriving, with regular guests who returned whenever they needed medical care in Milwaukee. I'd hired 2 part-time employees and was considering expanding to include respite care for family caregivers. Margaret would have been proud of how her house was being used to nurture families in crisis. Marcus and I had slowly, carefully rebuilt a friendship based on shared grief for his mother and mutual respect for the people we'd become after our marriage ended. He'd moved to Chicago for a new job, partly to distance himself from the family dynamics that had contributed to our divorce. We exchanged Christmas cards and occasional emails, but the romantic love that had once connected us was gone, replaced by something more durable, the understanding between 2 people who'd survived the same catastrophe. Rebecca was released after serving 18 months of her sentence, time reduced for good behaviour and participation in intensive therapy programs. Tyler told me she'd moved to a different state, working as a bookkeeper for a non-profit organisation and living quietly with strict conditions on her probation. She'd written me several letters from prison, but I'd returned them unopened. I wasn't ready for her attempts at redemption, and I might never be. The real healing had come from understanding that some betrayals are so profound they change you at a cellular level, but that change doesn't have to be destructive. I was different after what Rebecca did to me, more cautious about trust, more aware of the ways people can weaponize kindness, more protective of my emotional boundaries, but I was also stronger, more independent, more certain of my own worth. The knock at my door came on a Thursday evening in late spring, 3 years after Rebecca's sentencing. I'd just finished preparing breakfast for the next morning's guests when I heard the familiar rhythm of knuckles against wood that still made my stomach clench with remembered trauma. Through the peephole, I saw a figure I barely recognised. Marcus stood on my front porch, but he looked different, lighter somehow, as if he'd been carrying invisible weight that had finally been lifted. His hair was shorter, his clothes more casual than the suits I remembered, and there was something in his posture that spoke of hard-won peace rather than chronic guilt. I opened the door, keeping the security chain engaged out of habit rather than fear. "Marcus, this is unexpected." "I should have called," he said, his voice carrying the slight nervousness of someone who wasn't sure of their welcome. "I was in town for work, and, well, there's something I need to tell you. Something important." I studied his face through the gap in the door. Whatever had brought him here wasn't casual conversation or social politeness. There was an urgency in his eyes that reminded me of the night his mother died, the look of someone carrying news that would change everything. "Come in," I said, disengaging the chain. "I just made coffee." My living room looked different than it had during our marriage. I'd redecorated completely, replacing our shared furniture with pieces that reflected my taste alone. The walls displayed photographs from my travels, artwork from local artists, and a few cherished pictures of Margaret and me during our happier times. It was clearly the home of someone who'd rebuilt their life intentionally and successfully. Marcus accepted the coffee I offered and sat carefully on the edge of my sofa, as if he wasn't sure he belonged there. "The house looks incredible, Sophia. Mom would have loved what you've done with it." "Thank you. But I don't think you came here to discuss interior decorating." He set his coffee cup down without drinking from it. "No, I didn't. I came because Tyler called me yesterday with news about Rebecca. News that changes everything we thought we knew about what happened." My blood went cold. "What kind of news?" "She's dead, Sophia. Rebecca died 2 weeks ago." I sat down heavily in the chair across from him, trying to process this information. "How? Car accident? But that's not the important part. Tyler found something when he was cleaning out her apartment. Something she'd hidden, something that proves the scope of what she did to us was even worse than we knew." Marcus reached into his jacket and pulled out a manila envelope, thick with documents. "Tyler asked me to bring this to you personally. He thought you deserved to understand the full truth." "I'm not sure I want to know any more truth," I said honestly. "I've built a good life here. I've made peace with what happened. I understand that, and if you want me to leave without opening this, I will. But Sophia, what's in here?" It proves that Rebecca's mental illness was only part of the story. There was someone else involved, someone who helped her plan and execute everything that happened to us. I stared at the envelope as if it were a snake that might bite me. Part of me wanted to refuse whatever revelation it contained, to protect the equilibrium I'd worked so hard to achieve. But another part of me, the part that had always needed to understand the why behind human behaviour, couldn't resist. "Show me," I said. The documents Marcus spread across my coffee table painted a picture so shocking that I had to read some pages multiple times before the information penetrated. Rebecca hadn't been the mastermind of my destruction. She'd been a willing accomplice to someone whose manipulation was even more sophisticated and cruel. The first document was a series of printed emails between Rebecca and someone with the address justiceseeker_2021@protonmail.com. The messages went back over a year before Margaret's death, detailing a careful plan to expose Sophia's true nature and protect Marcus from making a terrible mistake. But it wasn't the plan that shocked me. It was the intimate knowledge the mystery correspondent had about my daily routines, my work schedule, my relationships, my fears and insecurities. This person knew things about me that even Marcus didn't know, personal details that could only have been gathered through careful surveillance or access to my private communications. "Do you recognize the writing style?" Marcus asked, watching my face as I read. I studied the emails more carefully. The tone was familiar, casual but calculated, supportive but subtly manipulative. The correspondent praised Rebecca for her intuition about my motives while providing detailed suggestions for gathering evidence and creating documentation that would support their narrative. "Tyler found more," Marcus said, pulling out another set of documents. "Bank statements showing payments to a private investigator. Rebecca hired someone to follow you, to document your activities, to build a profile of your behavior that could be twisted to support their accusations." The private investigator's reports were chilling in their thoroughness. Photos of me entering and leaving Margaret's apartment, time-stamped records of my visits to the bank with her, detailed notes about my purchases and activities. But the most disturbing aspect was how the investigator had interpreted normal, caring behavior as suspicious. Spent 4 hours with subject at medical appointment, remained in private consultation with doctors, read one entry. Subject appeared to be taking controlling role in medical decisions. Another entry noted, subject accompanied elderly woman to bank, waited outside during transaction, helped woman to car afterward. Relationship appears closer than typical caregiver dynamic. Every act of kindness, every moment of genuine care I'd provided to Margaret had been documented and reframed as evidence of manipulation and exploitation. The private investigator had been fed a narrative about me being a gold digger and had dutifully gathered evidence to support that predetermined conclusion. "But this still doesn't tell us who was really behind it," I said, looking up from the reports. "Rebecca could have hired this investigator herself." "Keep reading," Marcus said quietly. The final set of documents included copies of checks written to both Rebecca and the private investigator, payments that had funded the entire operation. The checks were signed with a name that made my hands shake, Dr. Amanda Sterling, my former supervisor at the Children's Hospital, the woman who'd written me glowing performance reviews while secretly orchestrating my personal destruction. Amanda Sterling had been the head of pediatric nursing when I'd started at Milwaukee Children's Hospital 6 years earlier. She'd taken me under her wing immediately, becoming both a professional mentor and a personal confidant. I trusted her completely, sharing details about my relationship with Marcus, my hopes for marriage and family, my struggles with feeling accepted by his family. Looking back with the clarity that hindsight provides, I could see how Amanda had used that trust to gather intelligence that would later be weaponized against me. She'd encouraged me to talk about my relationship, asking probing questions disguised as caring interest. She'd been particularly interested in my stories about Margaret, about the family dynamics that sometimes left me feeling like an outsider. "I remember now," I said, the pieces clicking into place with horrible clarity. "Amanda was always asking about your family, about your mother's health, about how I was handling the stress of being a caregiver. I thought she was being supportive." "When did she first suggest you might want to find a different position?" Marcus asked. I thought back to the months before Margaret's diagnosis. It was subtle at first. Comments about how demanding the job was, how I might be happier somewhere with better work-life balance. But after your mother got sick, Amanda became more direct about suggesting I consider transferring to a different department or even a different hospital entirely. "She was trying to isolate you," Marcus realized, "get you away from the support system you'd built at work before she struck." The emails between Amanda and Rebecca revealed a sophisticated psychological operation designed to destroy my credibility, my marriage, and my emotional stability. Amanda had provided Rebecca with detailed profiles of my personality, my vulnerabilities, and my likely responses to different types of stress. She'd coached Rebecca on how to manipulate family dynamics and how to present evidence in ways that would be most damaging. But the most chilling revelation was Amanda's motivation. In her final email to Rebecca, sent just days before Margaret's death, she'd written, "Once this is over, Marcus will need someone to help him heal. Someone who understands loss and can provide the professional support he'll need. I'll be ready to step in when the time is right." "She wanted you," I said, looking up at Marcus with a mixture of horror and disgust. This whole thing was about eliminating me so she could position herself as your rescuer? It gets worse, Marcus said grimly. Tyler found evidence that Amanda had done this before. There's a folder full of research about other women she'd targeted, nurses who'd married doctors, social workers who'd gotten involved with lawyers, teachers' assistants who'd started dating professors. She has a pattern of targeting women in helping professions who partner with men in higher status careers. The scope of Amanda's predatory behaviour was staggering. She'd spent years identifying women she saw as threats or competition, then systematically destroying their relationships through carefully orchestrated campaigns of manipulation and false evidence. I'd been just her latest victim, chosen because my happiness with Marcus represented something she wanted for herself. How many other women? I asked. At least 6 that Tyler could identify from the documents. Probably more. I thought about the other nurses who'd left the hospital during my time there, women who'd quit suddenly after personal crises or family problems. Had they been Amanda's victims too? Had she been destroying lives for years while maintaining her professional reputation as a caring mentor and advocate? Where is she now? I asked. That's the other reason I'm here, Marcus said. Amanda approached me 2 months ago. She came to my office in Chicago, said she'd heard about our divorce and wanted to offer support. She suggested we meet for dinner to talk about processing grief and rebuilding after betrayal. Please tell me you didn't. I turned her down, but not because I suspected anything. I just wasn't ready to date anyone. But Sophia, if Tyler hadn't found these documents, if Rebecca hadn't died, and her secrets hadn't been exposed, Amanda might have succeeded. I might have eventually accepted her support and walked right into her trap. The thought of Amanda comforting Marcus while secretly having orchestrated his pain made me physically ill. She would have positioned herself as the understanding professional who could help him heal from the trauma she'd created, gradually building a relationship based on lies and manipulation. We have to stop her, I said. If she's done this to 6 women, she'll do it to more. How many other lives is she going to destroy for her own gratification? Tyler's already contacted the FBI, Marcus said. Wire fraud, conspiracy, harassment, maybe racketeering if they can prove it's part of an ongoing criminal enterprise. But Sophia, they're going to need you to testify. Your story is the most complete example of her methods, and you're the only victim who can demonstrate the full scope of the damage she caused. I thought about Amanda Sterling sitting in court, finally facing consequences for the lives she'd destroyed in pursuit of her twisted goals. The idea of testifying against her was both terrifying and satisfying. After years of being painted as the villain in my own story, I'd finally have the chance to tell the truth about who the real predator had been. I'll testify, I said, but I want something in return. What? I want you to help me contact the other victims. If Amanda destroyed 6 other women's lives, they deserve to know the truth. They deserve to understand that whatever happened to them wasn't their fault, wasn't their failure, wasn't evidence of their inadequacy or unworthiness. They deserve to know they were targeted by a predator. Marcus nodded. Tyler made copies of everything. We can find them. Finding Amanda's other victims took 6 months of careful detective work, but it was the most important mission of my life. Each woman's story followed a similar pattern. A loving relationship destroyed by carefully planted evidence, families turned against each other by manufactured crises, careers damaged by whisper campaigns and false accusations. Sarah Chen, no relation to Marcus, had been a nurse practitioner who'd married a pediatric surgeon. Amanda had convinced Sarah's colleagues that she was stealing medication, leading to a DEA investigation that cleared her but destroyed her professional reputation. Her marriage hadn't survived the stress, and she'd moved to rural Montana, where she worked at a community clinic for a fraction of her previous salary. Jennifer Martinez had been a social worker engaged to a federal prosecutor. Amanda had created fake evidence suggesting Jennifer was sharing confidential case information with her fiancé, leading to an ethics investigation and criminal charges that were eventually dropped. But Jennifer's career was over, her engagement ended, and she'd spent 3 years rebuilding her life as a victim's advocate in Arizona. The stories continued, each one a variation on the same theme. Professional women whose happiness had made them targets for Amanda's jealousy and manipulation. Some had lost their careers, some their relationships, some their faith in their own judgment. All had been left wondering what they'd done wrong, how they'd failed so completely. But now they knew the truth. Our first meeting was held in a conference room at a hotel in Chicago, neutral ground where all 6 surviving victims could gather safely. I'd prepared a presentation documenting Amanda's methods, showing how she'd used the same psychological techniques against all of us. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. I blamed myself for 10 years, said Maria Santos, a former teacher whose marriage to a principal had been destroyed by fake evidence of grade tampering. I thought I'd been naive, that I'd missed warning signs, that I'd been a fool to trust the wrong people. We all blamed ourselves? Jennifer added. That's what she counted on. She knew that women are socialized to internalize failure, to assume that if something goes wrong in our relationships, it must be our fault. The private investigator she hired to follow me got pictures of me having lunch with a male colleague, Sarah explained. She turned them into evidence of an affair, complete with fake hotel receipts and forged text messages. My husband saw the evidence and filed for divorce immediately. I never even got a chance to defend myself. Each woman's story revealed new aspects of Amanda's sophisticated operation. She'd used different private investigators in different cities to avoid creating patterns that might be detected. She'd carefully studied each victim's personality and relationship dynamics to craft accusations that would be believable to their partners. She'd positioned herself as a concerned friend or colleague who was reluctantly sharing troubling information. But perhaps most insidiously, she targeted women who worked in helping professions. Nurses, teachers, social workers, because their natural empathy and desire to fix problems made them less likely to fight back when accused. She'd counted on us to absorb blame, to try to understand and forgive, to sacrifice ourselves rather than create conflict. She was wrong about that, I said to the group. We're not passive victims. We're survivors who've been trained to help people, and now we're going to help each other. Amanda Sterling's trial began on a grey Monday in February, almost 5 years after she'd begun her campaign to destroy my marriage. She sat at the defendant's table, looking every inch the professional woman she'd always presented herself as. Perfectly groomed, wearing a navy suit that conveyed authority and respectability, her expression one of dignified confusion rather than guilt. The prosecution had built an overwhelming case, financial records showing payments to multiple private investigators across 6 different states, email communications detailing specific plans to manufacture evidence against individual women, testimony from the private investigators she'd hired, most of whom had been unaware they were participating in criminal conspiracies. But the most powerful evidence came from Amanda's own digital footprint. Her laptop, seized during the FBI raid on her home, contained detailed files on each of her victims. Psychological profiles, relationship analysis, strategic plans for destroying their credibility, and timeline-based execution of increasingly sophisticated attacks. The defendant didn't simply dislike these women, the prosecutor explained to the jury during opening statements. She studied them with the intensity of a behavioral scientist, learning their vulnerabilities, their fears, their pressure points. Then she weaponized that knowledge to systematically destroy their lives for her own personal gain. When my turn came to testify, I spoke directly to the jury about the impact Amanda's actions had on my life. The loss of my marriage, the destruction of my relationship with Marcus's family, the public humiliation, the years of rebuilding trust in my own judgment. But I also want you to understand, I said, that I was one of the lucky ones. I had resources to rebuild my life. I had a friend who helped me escape to safety. I had the emotional strength to start over. Not all of Amanda Sterling's victims were so fortunate. Amanda's defense attorney tried to paint her as a woman whose mental health issues had led to poor judgment rather than criminal behavior. He argued that her actions, while inappropriate, didn't rise to the level of federal crimes and should be treated as civil matters between private parties. My client is a dedicated healthcare professional who has devoted her career to helping children and families, he told the jury. Yes, she became too involved in her colleagues' personal lives. Yes, she made mistakes in judgment. But criminal conspiracy, racketeering, these charges are disproportionate to the evidence. But the evidence was too overwhelming, too well documented, too clearly premeditated for that defense to succeed. Amanda had created detailed budgets for destroying each victim, careful timelines for maximum impact, and backup plans for maintaining plausible deniability. This wasn't mental illness. It was calculated predation. The most damaging testimony came from Rebecca's communications with Amanda, emails that had been recovered from Rebecca's hidden files. In them, Amanda provided specific coaching on how to manipulate Marcus, how to time the accusations for maximum emotional impact, and how to present evidence in ways that would prevent me from mounting an effective defense. Make sure you're crying when you tell him about the necklace, Amanda had written. Men can't think rationally when women are crying. And don't give her time to explain. The longer she talks, the more likely he is to start believing her instead of you. When Amanda took the stand in her own defense, she maintained her innocence with the same professional confidence she'd displayed throughout her career. She admitted to supporting colleagues who were concerned about others' behavior, but denied any criminal intent or coordination. I believed I was helping families avoid painful situations, she testified. When colleagues came to me with concerns about potentially inappropriate relationships or concerning behavior, I provided guidance and resources. I never intended for anyone to be harmed. But under cross-examination, her carefully constructed facade began to crack. The prosecutor systematically walked her through each victim's case, showing how her support had included funding private investigators, manufacturing evidence, and coaching accusers on how to present their cases most effectively. Dr. Sterling, the prosecutor asked, can you explain why you felt it was appropriate to hire private investigators to follow women you'd never met, to photograph their daily activities, and to compile detailed reports about their personal relationships? I was concerned about patterns of behavior that seemed predatory. Predatory behavior like forming romantic relationships with successful men, like targeting vulnerable families for financial gain. And you determined these women were targeting vulnerable families based on what evidence? Based on the concerns raised by people who knew them. People like Rebecca Chen, who you'd never met before you contacted her about destroying her brother's marriage. I don't recall the specific details of that communication. Let me refresh your memory. The prosecutor displayed Amanda's initial email to Rebecca, sent 8 months before Margaret's death. I'm writing because I'm concerned about your brother's marriage to one of my nurses. I've observed some troubling patterns in her behavior that suggest she may be targeting your family for financial gain. Would you be willing to discuss this privately? Dr. Sterling, how did you know Rebecca Chen's contact information? I must have found it online. You found the personal email address of a woman in Denver, Colorado, whom you'd never met, because you were concerned about her brother's marriage to one of your employees. Amanda's pause was long enough for the jury to understand she'd been caught in a lie. I may have done some research. Research that included hiring a private investigator to compile detailed reports about Miss Chen's family dynamics, her relationship with her brother, her financial situation, and her psychological profile. I don't recall. But the prosecution had those reports too, detailed psychological analyses that Amanda had commissioned to identify the most effective ways to manipulate Rebecca into becoming her ally. The reports recommended appealing to Rebecca's need for control, her financial anxieties, and her complicated relationship with her brother's independence. By the time Amanda stepped down from the witness stand, her credibility was in ruins. The jury had seen documented evidence of a years-long pattern of predatory behavior targeting successful women whose happiness threatened her own sense of self-worth. The jury deliberated for less than 6 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all counts: conspiracy, wire fraud, stalking, racketeering, and interstate harassment. Amanda Sterling was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison, with supervised probation for an additional 5 years upon release. As the bailiff led her away in handcuffs, Amanda looked back at the gallery where her victims sat together. For the first time since I'd known her, her professional mask slipped completely. The expression on her face wasn't anger or defiance. It was envy so pure and toxic, it made me feel sick. Even facing prison, even having been exposed as a predator who destroyed multiple families, Amanda Sterling was still consumed by jealousy for the love and happiness she tried so hard to steal from others. After the sentencing, the 6 surviving victims held a press conference to raise awareness about sophisticated psychological manipulation in professional settings. We'd founded a non-profit organisation called Believe and Rebuild to help other women who'd been targeted by similar predators. Amanda Sterling destroyed our marriages, our careers, and our faith in our own judgment, I told the reporters gathered in the courthouse lobby. But she didn't destroy us. We rebuilt our lives, we found our strength, and we're here to help other women do the same. Jennifer Martinez had become our legal advocate, using her law degree to help victims navigate complex criminal and civil proceedings. Sarah Chen provided medical consulting for women whose health had been affected by sustained psychological abuse. Maria Santos developed educational materials to help people recognize and resist manipulation tactics. Together, we'd created something Amanda had never expected, a network of women made stronger by our shared experience of surviving her cruelty. 5 years after Amanda Sterling's conviction, I received an unexpected letter. It was from Marcus, written on letterhead from a legal aid clinic in Portland, where he'd taken a position helping low-income families navigate legal challenges. Dear Sophia, it began, I wanted you to know that I've been following the work you're doing with Believe and Rebuild, and I'm constantly amazed by your strength and your commitment to helping other women heal from experiences like yours. You've taken the worst thing that ever happened to you and transformed it into a force for protecting others. He went on to explain that he'd left private practice permanently, choosing instead to use his legal training to help people who couldn't afford quality representation. He'd also started speaking at conferences about the role family members play in enabling abusive dynamics, sharing his own story about how his failure to believe his wife had made him complicit in her destruction. I know I can never undo the damage I caused by choosing my sister's lies over your truth, he wrote. But I want you to know that I've spent every day since then trying to become the kind of person who would deserve your trust, even though I understand I forfeited any right to it years ago. The letter ended with an invitation. Marcus was getting married to Sarah Delacroix, a victim's advocate he'd met through his legal aid work. They wanted to make a donation to Believe and Rebuild in honor of their wedding, and they'd like me to know that their relationship was built on the lessons he'd learned from failing me so completely. Sarah knows our entire story, he wrote. She understands that learning to believe women, especially when their truth is inconvenient or challenging, was the most important lesson I've ever learned. I hope someday you'll be able to meet her and see that the man who destroyed our marriage has become someone who might actually deserve the love of a woman like her. I wrote back to congratulate him and to accept their donation. I also included a photo from the most recent Believe and Rebuild conference, showing 200 women who'd gathered to share their stories and support each other's healing. Marcus, I wrote, the best apology is changed behaviour, and it sounds like you've spent years changing yourself into someone your mother would be proud of. I hope you and Sarah build the kind of marriage that can weather any storm, the kind that's based on trust and belief rather than doubt and fear. I meant it. My anger toward Marcus had long since transformed into something more complex. Not forgiveness exactly, but an acceptance that people can learn from their failures and become better than they were. His willingness to speak publicly about his role in my destruction had helped other family members understand their power to protect or destroy their loved ones. 10 years after Rebecca's first accusation, I stood in the garden behind Margaret's house, my house now, watching the sun set over the tomato plants I'd finally learned to grow properly. The bed and breakfast had expanded to include a conference centre where support groups met and healing workshops were held. The house that had been the site of my greatest betrayal had become a sanctuary for women rebuilding their lives after similar experiences. My phone buzzed with a text from Claire, who was flying in the next morning for our annual Survived Another Year celebration. She'd become the operations director for Believe and Rebuild, using her graphic design skills to create materials that helped women document abuse and build legal cases against their manipulators. I'd never remarried, never had the children I'd once imagined sharing with Marcus, but I'd built something different, a chosen family of survivors who supported each other through the ongoing process of healing and growth. We celebrated each other's victories, held each other through setbacks, and created the kind of unconditional acceptance that predators like Amanda Sterling tried to destroy. Margaret's jade necklace, the real one, not the fake Rebecca had purchased, was eventually found in a safety deposit box Margaret had rented without telling anyone. Tyler discovered it while settling Rebecca's estate, along with a note from Margaret explaining that she'd hidden her most precious jewellery to protect it from whoever might try to take advantage of my illness. Even in her final months, struggling with chemotherapy and the manipulation of her own daughter, Margaret had sensed that someone in her circle couldn't be trusted. Her intuition had been right, just directed at the wrong person. Tyler had offered to give me the necklace, saying Margaret would have wanted me to have it. But I declined, suggesting instead that he keep it for his daughters. Margaret's granddaughters, who would grow up hearing stories about their grandmother's kindness and their aunt's cruelty, lessons about the difference between love and possession. As darkness fell over Milwaukee, I thought about Amanda Sterling in her federal prison cell, probably still plotting ways to manipulate her fellow inmates and blame others for her predicament. Some people never learn, never grow, never accept responsibility for the damage they cause. But others do. Marcus had learned. Tyler had learned. Even Rebecca, in her final months, had begun to understand the scope of her actions and their consequences. The capacity for growth and redemption exists in most people, even those who've caused tremendous harm. I'd learned too. Not just to trust my instincts and protect my boundaries, but to recognize the difference between people who make mistakes and people who exploit others systematically. I'd learned that survival isn't just about enduring trauma, but about transforming it into wisdom that can protect others. The house was quiet around me as I locked up for the night, checking on the guest rooms where 3 families were staying while dealing with medical crises. Tomorrow I'd help them navigate insurance paperwork and connect with local resources. Next week, I'd testify in another case against a different predator who'd targeted vulnerable women. This was my life now, built from the ruins of Amanda Sterling's cruelty, stronger and more purposeful than anything I could have imagined during those dark days when my world was collapsing. I'd learned that sometimes the most powerful revenge isn't what you do to the people who hurt you. It's what you refuse to let them stop you from becoming. The last light faded from the garden as I climbed the stairs to my bedroom, surrounded by the peaceful energy of a house where healing happened daily. Outside, Milwaukee hummed with the quiet activity of people living their lives, loving their families, making mistakes, and learning from them. And somewhere in that vast network of human experience, other women were discovering their own strength, their own capacity to survive and rebuild and transform their pain into purpose. That was Amanda Sterling's real legacy, not the destruction she'd caused, but the army of survivors she'd inadvertently created. Women who would spend their lives ensuring that others like her could never again operate in the shadows. I fell asleep that night thinking not about the family that had betrayed me, but about the family I'd chosen. The community of women who'd risen from the ashes of their own destruction to become protectors of others. We'd built something beautiful from something broken, and that beauty would outlast any damage our predators had inflicted. In the end, that was the most powerful truth of all. Love multiplies when it's shared, but cruelty consumes the people who practice it. Amanda Sterling would spend the next decade in prison, isolated and bitter. We would spend it building bridges, healing wounds, and creating the kind of world where predators like her could no longer hide. The truth had finally surfaced, and it was more beautiful than any of us had dared to hope.